June 1971. 1,500 feet above the long green jungle of South Vietnam, the rotor wash from a Huey helicopter dissipates into silence. Below, 5 Australian SAS soldiers check their gear, 6 days of rations, radio sets, sniper scopes. They move out into enemy territory. 5 minutes pass. Then a second helicopter arrives. The Viet Cong had studied every signature for years: rotor noise, insertion patterns, foot traffic. They knew the rules. One bird, one patrol, predictable movement. They'd changed their patrol routes to counter it. But tonight, the SAS changed something else. As the second team lands and splits off, radio chatter crackles through VC listening posts. 2 helicopters, 2 teams. Which one do we follow? For the first time in years, the enemy who owned these trails had to guess. The Viet Cong would adapt their routes again and again. They'd shift 300 meters east, then 400 meters deeper into the jungle. And somehow, they'd still lose 500 men. By mid-1971, the numbers told a story the Australian and New Zealand SAS never advertised. Nearly 1,200 patrols deep in South Vietnam. 492 confirmed Viet Cong killed. 106 possibly killed. Their own fatal losses? Almost negligible. The mathematics of small unit warfare had never looked so decisive, yet something was shifting in the jungle corridors of Phuoc Tuy province. The local VC units still moved through the border region between 3 Corps and 2 Corps with practiced confidence. They knew every rubber plantation trail, every infiltration route threading from the Mae Tao Mountains down to the coastal plains. The Australians called this terrain the Long Green, or sometimes Min Dam's secret zone, from earlier operations. For 5 years, the enemy had learned to read the signatures of Allied patrols like a familiar language. Sergeant Mick Evans adjusted his radio headset as the UH-1H Huey banked toward the insertion zone at 1,200 feet above the jungle canopy. The helicopter's turbine whined at cruise power, 100 knots, carrying his 6-man patrol toward what intelligence marked as a fresh supply corridor. Evans had been running these long-range reconnaissance patrols since 1966, when the SASR first deployed to Phuoc Tuy. He knew the routine by heart. Choose the landing zone. Insert quietly under rotor wash that displaced 50 tons of air per minute. Move into position. Patrol for days with 18 kilograms of gear per man. Observe and ambush if opportunity presented. The problem had been growing for months. After 5 years of SAS patrolling, the VC had finally become familiar with insertion techniques. From June onward, it was not unusual for Australian teams to be fired upon shortly after landing in an area. The enemy had closed the gap of surprise. They recognized the sound of slick helicopters, the timing of insertions, the shadows of men, fast roping into clearings. The VC listening post tracked every rotor echo, every landing pattern, every movement signature that followed. Evans checked his M16, then glanced at his radio operator and scout. The conventional wisdom said, you varied insertion zones, changed routes, mixed up movement patterns. But behind those tactical adjustments lay a deeper problem. The VC weren't just reacting to where the Australians landed, they were predicting it. 5 minutes after a helicopter departed, enemy forces knew exactly what to expect. One patrol, moving in a predictable arc, following doctrine that had worked for years but had become transparent through repetition. The Huey flared into its landing hover, rotor wash bending the jungle canopy below. Evans felt the familiar vibration through his boots as the helicopter settled. 45 seconds to unload, check weapons, move to tree line. The pilot would lift off, disappear over the horizon, leave them alone in enemy territory for 6 days. Standard operating procedure. The same signature the VC had been studying since 1966. But today carried a variation. As Evans led his team toward the jungle edge, another rotor echo approached from the west, 5 minutes behind schedule, exactly as planned. The second UH-1H settled into the same landing zone, disgorging Warrant Officer Richard Campbell and his New Zealand SAS team. Campbell's men moved quickly, bundling their 12 kilograms of gear in under 90 seconds, but instead of following Evans deeper into the jungle, they held position. The radio crackled in Evans's earpiece, Campbell's voice calm and professional. Second team on ground, standing by for Phase 1. This was the cowboy insertion. 2 helicopters, 2 patrols, staggered by 5 minutes. If there was no enemy contact within the first phase, Campbell's team would return to the landing zone for extraction. If contact developed, the second patrol would be in position as immediate reinforcement or blocking force. The tactic addressed insertion predictability by adding layers of deception and threat. The VC could no longer predict which patrol to engage, when to initiate contact, or how many men they faced. Evans pressed forward through the triple canopy, his team spaced at 5-meter intervals. Behind them, Campbell's patrol remained motionless, listening, watching the approaches to the landing zone. The jungle exhaled its familiar mixture of moisture and decay, but the operational equation had changed. For the first time in months, the initiative belonged to the Australians. The VC listening post 2 kilometers east picked up both helicopter insertions on their radio net. The observer transmitted, 2 slicks, same grid, 5 minutes apart. SAS insertion confirmed. But the follow-up message carried uncertainty. Unknown patrol strength, unknown movement direction, request instructions. The tactical dilemma was immediate. Engage the first patrol and risk being trapped by the second? Wait and lose the advantage of prepared ambush positions? The VC field commander faced a choice that hadn't existed under the old insertion pattern. Previously, 1 helicopter meant 1 predictable patrol. Now, 2 helicopters created multiple variables, multiple threats, multiple opportunities for the enemy to make the wrong decision. Evans reached the phase line 200 meters from the landing zone. His radio operator tapped him on the shoulder. Still no contact, no movement, no enemy signatures detected. The jungle remained quiet except for the distant echo of insects and the whisper of wind through rubber trees. Campbell's team could extract cleanly, mission parameters satisfied. But the psychological shift had already occurred. The VC units patrolling this sector now had to account for variables they couldn't predict. The insertion signature that had become routine, transparent, predictable, was now layered with uncertainty. Even when they adapted their patrol routes, shifted their timing, changed their approach corridors, the fundamental problem remained. They no longer controlled the initiative in the first critical minutes after insertion. The cowboy insertion method reversed 5 years of tactical evolution. Instead of the SAS adapting to VC countermeasures, the enemy now had to react to Australian innovation. The mathematics of small unit engagement had shifted, not through superior firepower or larger numbers, but through a simple adjustment in timing and deception that exploited the enemy's own tactical assumptions. Evans keyed his radio one final time before moving deeper into the long green. Phase 1 complete. Second team clear for extraction. The war would continue for another year, but the rules of engagement had changed permanently in those 5 minutes between helicopter insertions. From June 1971 onward, the SASR began rolling out the cowboy insertion method across their area of operations around Nui Dat, Phuoc Tui Province. The New Zealand troop, designated 4 Troop SAS, had been attached to the Australian squadron since 1968, and their integration into the new tactic proved seamless. Despite the VC adapting patrol routes throughout the region, the Australians and New Zealanders continued mounting long-range patrols deep into enemy-controlled territory with increasing effectiveness. On July 15, 1971, Evans led his patrol through the standard insertion sequence at 1,200 feet above the tree canopy. The Huey's hover time lasted 45 seconds, rotor wash displacing its familiar 50 tons of air per minute, but this time the follow-up helicopter carried more than just backup. Intelligence had identified a new supply trail, 1.8 kilometers long, linking the Mai Tau Mountains to the Courtenay rubber plantation sector. The coordinates marked on Evans's map represented a shift in VC logistics that demanded immediate investigation. His patrol collected intelligence methodically. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed the trail's existence, but ground verification revealed construction details invisible from altitude. Fresh footprints pressed into red clay numbered 37 distinct impressions. Boot treads mixed with sandal patterns suggested regular forces operating alongside local militia. One partially completed bunker showed recent excavation, the earth still dark with moisture. 6 rations cans bore May 1971 dates, indicating steady supply flow. Several empty medical packets scattered near a rest area confirmed the trail's active use. Evans marked coordinates via his ANPRC-77 radio, transmitting map references back to base while his scout identified ambush positions. Grid reference XY1234 offered optimal fields of fire across a natural choke point where the trail narrowed between 2 rubber tree groves. At 0230 hours, his team settled into position. Night vision scopes tracking movement along the suspected infiltration route. The documents captured 3 days later revealed the enemy's tactical adjustment. VC units had altered their primary route to a corridor 300 meters deeper into the plantation, shifting from west of Route 2 to 400 meters east. The intelligence windfall came from a contact initiated on Australian terms rather than enemy timing. Campbell's blocking patrol, positioned during a cowboy insertion, had intercepted a VC squad attempting to exfiltrate after spotting the first team's insertion. The engagement lasted 7 minutes. 12 VC fighters, moving in single file along what they believed was a secure withdrawal route, walked into Campbell's blocking position at 2200 hours. The New Zealanders initiated contact with disciplined fire, dropping 3 enemy soldiers immediately while the remainder scattered into secondary jungle. No Australian or New Zealand casualties resulted from the contact, but the intelligence gathered from abandoned equipment proved invaluable. From the enemy's perspective, the tactical equation had fundamentally changed. VC listening posts monitored radio frequencies, tracking helicopter movements with practiced efficiency. When observers reported helicopter insertion, 2 lift zones, SAS spear tip, local commanders faced an unprecedented decision matrix. The traditional response, engage early or sit and wait, no longer offered clear advantages. Engaging the first patrol risked exposure to the second team's blocking fire. Waiting meant surrendering initiative during the critical insertion phase. Captain Nguyen Hoang, commanding a local force platoon in the Phuoc Tuy sector, experienced this tactical shift directly. His 15-man squad had patrolled the border region for 18 months, accustomed to shifting routes before dawn when Allied activity increased. The sound of twin helicopter insertions forced immediate tactical reassessment. His Zion Sur radio operator transmitted, 2 birds confirmed, first team moving east, second team stationary at landing zone. The decision to wait proved costly when Campbell's patrol withdrew 5 minutes later, leaving Hoang's position exposed to Evans' advancing team. The mathematical progression became evident in operational statistics. From June through September 1971, SASR units conducted 120 patrols, averaging 1 patrol every 0.75 days. Insertion altitudes averaged 1,500 feet, with ground movements covering approximately 5 kilometers per patrol. Contact rates increased from 1 engagement per 15 patrols to 1 per 10 patrols, indicating improved tactical positioning rather than increased enemy presence. Major Alan Thompson, monitoring patrol returns from 1st Australian Task Force headquarters, documented the shift in after-action reports. His clipboard filled with metrics that defied conventional expectations. Insertion signatures becoming more complex, patrol effectiveness increasing despite enemy route changes, casualty ratios favoring Australian forces by unprecedented margins. Thompson's logistics background made him cautious of doctrinal deviations, but the numbers supported tactical innovation over institutional conservatism. The enemy intelligence network adapted accordingly. VC observation posts altered their reporting procedures, attempting to distinguish between decoy insertions and primary assault teams. Radio communications increased as local commanders sought guidance on engagement protocols. The additional communications traffic provided Allied signal intelligence with unprecedented insight into enemy decision-making processes, creating secondary intelligence benefits from the tactical innovation. Evans noted the change during a patrol debrief in late August. His team had observed enemy movement patterns shifting from predictable night infiltration to sporadic, hesitant probes. VC units moved smaller groups over longer periods, fragmenting their logistics and reducing operational efficiency. The psychological pressure of uncertain insertion patterns forced conservative movement, limiting enemy initiative throughout the operational area. Warrant Officer Campbell's experience confirmed the tactical shift from his blocking positions. Enemy exfiltration patterns became erratic, with VC units breaking contact earlier and moving along secondary trails rather than established routes. The presence of potential blocking forces, even when Campbell's team extracted after 5 minutes, created persistent uncertainty that influenced enemy behavior long after the helicopters departed. The cowboy insertion method had evolved from experimental tactic to operational doctrine within 3 months. Training protocols incorporated the timing sequences, helicopter coordination procedures, and radio communication patterns required for effective execution. The innovation that began as a response to enemy adaptation had become a systematic approach to patrol insertion, fundamentally altering the tactical balance in Phuoc Tuy province. By September's end, the SASR had documented consistent tactical advantage across multiple operational sectors, with enemy casualties remaining high despite route modifications and enhanced security procedures. By October 1971, the Viet Cong had begun implementing systematic countermeasures that challenged the effectiveness of cowboy insertions. Enemy units shifted from daylight patrol patterns to night movements, reducing footprint signatures and eliminating visual tracking opportunities. Booby trap installations increased along suspected landing zones, with wire-triggered devices positioned to target helicopter insertion points. Most significantly, VC forces scaled down contact initiation when rotor noise indicated incoming insertions, preferring withdrawal to engagement when facing uncertain patrol configurations. The tactical adjustment became evident during an insertion on October 12th. Evans's team landed at 1,300 feet elevation, with Campbell's supporting patrol inserted at the standard 5-minute interval. The first patrol advanced 2 kilometers along a suspected infiltration route, maintaining radio silence while navigating through dense rubber plantation terrain. At 14:20 hours, the point man triggered a wire-activated Claymore mine positioned across the trail. The explosion wounded 2 SAS soldiers with shrapnel and small arms fire, forcing immediate medical evacuation procedures. Campbell's blocking patrol responded within 3 minutes, advancing from their holding position to establish a casualty evacuation zone while maintaining security. The tactical coordination worked as designed, but the enemy had vanished before the blocking force could establish contact. VC forces had learned to emplace defensive devices and withdraw immediately, avoiding the multi-patrol engagement that cowboy insertions were designed to create. The psychological advantage had shifted back toward the enemy, who now controlled the timing in terms of contact. Captain Nguyen Huang's tactical adaptation reflected broader VC learning across the operational area. His platoon implemented pre-positioned withdrawal routes from every patrol sector, with timed movement schedules that assumed helicopter insertions would occur during daylight hours. When observation posts reported dual rotor signatures, his squads immediately displaced to secondary positions, sacrificing patrol objectives to avoid engagement with superior firepower and tactical coordination. The conservative approach reduced VC casualties, but also decreased their intelligence gathering and supply interdiction capabilities. The statistical evidence documented the tactical regression. For the quarter spanning October through December 1971, SASR units attempted 310 patrols, with contact rates falling from 1 engagement per 10 patrols to 1 per 15. Enemy casualties dropped by 30% compared to the previous quarter, indicating successful VC adaptation to insertion methods. The innovative tactic that had provided decisive advantage for 4 months was generating diminishing returns as enemy forces developed effective countermeasures. Major Thompson's after-action analysis highlighted the operational challenge facing Australian forces. Enemy adaptation had neutralized the surprise element of staggered insertions while increasing the complexity of patrol coordination. Helicopter assets remained committed to dual insertions even when the second patrol extracted without contact, reducing overall patrol frequency. The resource allocation that had seemed justified by tactical success now appeared inefficient given reduced enemy engagement rates. Evans experienced the tactical frustration during a November 3rd insertion that followed standard procedures but generated minimal intelligence. His patrol advanced through sectors that showed clear signs of recent enemy activity, fresh cooking fires, equipment caches, communications wire, but encountered no personnel. The VC had learned to evacuate areas upon hearing helicopter activity, denying the Australians both contact opportunities and intelligence collection. The tactical initiative that cowboy insertions had provided was eroding as enemy forces adapted their operational patterns. The breakthrough came during a night insertion on November 18th, when SASR leadership implemented a modified timing sequence. Instead of the standard 5-minute interval between helicopter insertions, the second patrol was delayed by 10 minutes. The extended gap confused VC timing calculations that had been calibrated to the original insertion pattern. Enemy forces positioned for 5-minute intervals found themselves out of position when the second helicopter arrived 5 minutes later than expected. Evans's first patrol landed at 17:45 hours during the evening twilight, moving immediately towards suspected enemy positions along a known infiltration route. Campbell's patrol, delayed by the extended interval, inserted at 17:55 hours into a secondary landing zone 400 meters from the primary site. The VC observation post reported standard dual insertion but miscalculated the tactical geometry due to the timing modification. At 22:10 hours, Evans's patrol established contact with a 15-man VC squad moving along what they believed was a secure withdrawal route. The enemy had positioned themselves to avoid the expected blocking force based on standard 5-minute insertion intervals. Campbell's actual position, displaced by the extended timing, allowed immediate flanking maneuvers that trapped the VC unit between two patrol elements. The engagement resulted in 9 enemy killed in action and 3 wounded captured, with no Australian casualties. The intelligence gathered from captured documents revealed the extent of VC tactical adaptation. Enemy units had developed detailed timing charts for helicopter insertions, with movement protocols designed specifically to counter the cowboy insertion method. Radio procedures included standardized reports for dual helicopter signatures, with withdrawal instructions calibrated to 5-minute intervals. The 10-minute modification had exploited enemy over-adaptation to Australian tactical innovation. Warrant Officer Campbell's perspective during the engagement highlighted the psychological dimension of tactical adaptation. His delayed insertion had created uncertainty within VC command structures that relied on predictable timing for tactical decision-making. Enemy forces committed to defensive positions based on expected patrol movements, leaving themselves vulnerable when the timing sequence changed. The modification required minimal additional resources while generating maximum tactical confusion. The success of the extended interval modification reinvigorated cowboy insertion procedures throughout the SASR operational area. Training protocols incorporated variable timing sequences ranging from 5 to 15 minutes between helicopter insertions. Radio communication procedures adapted to accommodate extended coordination requirements between patrol elements. Most importantly, the tactical flexibility demonstrated that innovation could counter adaptation through systematic modification rather than wholesale doctrinal change. Thompson's operational assessment documented the renewed effectiveness of modified cowboy insertions. Enemy casualties increased during December 1971 as VC forces struggled to adapt to variable timing sequences. Contact rates improved while maintaining the tactical advantages of dual patrol coordination. The intellectual competition between Australian innovation and Vietnamese adaptation had entered a new phase, with tactical modification providing temporary advantage until the next cycle of enemy counter-adaptation. The broader strategic context remained unchanged. Political decisions regarding troop withdrawals continued, regardless of tactical success, but the operational lesson was clear. Tactical innovation required continuous evolution to maintain effectiveness against adaptive enemies. The aggregate figures from SASR and NSAS operations in Vietnam presented a mathematical reality that conventional military doctrine struggled to explain. During their 6-year deployment, Australian and New Zealand Special Forces conducted nearly 1,200 patrols in hostile territory. Enemy casualties totaled 492 confirmed killed, 106 possibly killed, 47 wounded, 10 possibly wounded, and 11 prisoners captured. Against these numbers, SASR losses remained minimal. 1 killed in action, 1 died of wounds, 3 accidental deaths, 1 missing. In action, 1 death from illness and 28 wounded. The operational efficiency ratios defied standard military expectations. A typical Allied infantry battalion in Vietnam might achieve casualty exchanges of 3-to-1 or 5-to-1 in favorable circumstances. The SASR achieved ratios exceeding 30-to-1 while operating in small teams deep behind enemy lines. The mathematical disparity indicated systematic tactical advantages that transcended individual patrol success or failure. Major Thompson's statistical analysis documented performance metrics that challenged fundamental assumptions about small unit effectiveness in unconventional warfare. The central question remained whether VC route modifications had actually mattered. Intelligence assessments confirmed that enemy units had systematically altered patrol patterns, shifted supply corridors, and implemented new security procedures throughout Phuoc Tuy province. Trail networks moved 300 to 400 meters from original locations. Night movement protocols replaced daylight infiltration. Communication security increased with radio discipline and coded references. Despite these adaptations, enemy casualties continued at rates that suggested route changes alone provided insufficient protection against SASR operations. The cowboy insertion method had forced Viet Cong units into reactive tactical postures that surrendered initiative regardless of route selection. Enemy forces found themselves responding to helicopter signatures rather than initiating contact on predetermined timetables. The psychological pressure of uncertain patrol configurations disrupted enemy decision-making processes, even when specific routes avoided previous contact zones. VC commanders faced tactical uncertainty that persisted beyond individual engagement outcomes. Evans documented the mechanism during a December patrol that illustrated the persistent tactical advantage. His team inserted along a sector where VC forces had not operated for 6 weeks, following intelligence reports of route abandonment. The area appeared tactically sterile, with no recent footprints, equipment caches, or communication wire. Standard doctrine would suggest the sector had been successfully denied to enemy forces through effective patrolling pressure. At 03:15 hours, Evans's patrol detected movement along a trail that intelligence had assessed as abandoned. Thermal imaging revealed a 12-man VC squad moving through terrain they had avoided since October. The enemy unit was using the supposedly abandoned route specifically because they believed Australian patrols would avoid areas with no recent activity. The tactical psychology had inverted. VC forces were second-guessing Australian patrol selection based on their own route modifications. Campbell's blocking patrol, positioned during the standard cowboy insertion, intercepted the enemy squad at a trail junction 400 meters from the primary contact zone. The VC unit had planned their movement to avoid expected patrol locations, but the dual insertion method placed Australian forces across multiple approach routes simultaneously. Enemy tactical planning based on single patrol assumptions became obsolete when confronted with coordinated patrol elements. The engagement resulted in comprehensive tactical success. 7 enemy soldiers were killed, 3 wounded and captured, with 2 escaping into secondary jungle. Captured documents revealed detailed maps showing modified route structures throughout the operational area. More significantly, the papers included timing charts for Australian helicopter insertions and movement predictions based on previous patrol patterns. The enemy had developed systematic intelligence on SASR operations, yet still suffered decisive tactical defeat. The broader tactical analysis revealed 4 critical factors underlying SASR effectiveness. First, insertion altitude and timing variations disrupted VC early warning systems that depended on predictable helicopter signatures. Second, dual patrol configurations provided tactical flexibility that single patrol doctrine could not achieve. Third, superior training and equipment allowed Australian forces to capitalize on contact opportunities rather than merely survive them. Fourth, terrain familiarity and rubber plantation and jungle environments provided operational advantages that transcended specific route selection. The consequences extended beyond immediate tactical success. For VC forces, the attrition represented strategic degradation of local capabilities. 500 casualties across units that typically operated in squad or platoon strength indicated systematic disruption of enemy organizational structure. Recruitment, training, and leadership replacement could not compensate for loss rates that exceeded sustainable levels. The tactical innovation had generated strategic effects through accumulated operational pressure. For Australian and New Zealand forces, the cowboy insertion method became institutionalized doctrine that influenced special operations procedures beyond Vietnam. Training protocols incorporated staggered insertion techniques, multi-patrol coordination, and tactical flexibility that proved applicable to other operational environments. The innovation developed under combat pressure provided conceptual frameworks for future special operations missions worldwide. Thompson's operational assessment documented the intellectual dimension of tactical success. Small decisions regarding helicopter timing and patrol coordination had generated outcomes that larger strategic initiatives failed to achieve. The mechanism demonstrated how tactical innovation could amplify limited resources into disproportionate effects. The lesson extended beyond specific techniques to fundamental principles of operational thinking under pressure. Sergeant Evans reflected on the cumulative impact during his final patrol in February 1972. His diary entry captured the tactical transformation. "We changed the way the jungle worked. The enemy adapted their routes, modified their timing, altered their security procedures, but they still had to react to our helicopters instead of controlling their own operations. The initiative never returned to them, regardless of which trails they used." The strategic paradox remained evident in operational statistics. Enemy forces had successfully implemented systematic adaptations to counter Australian patrol methods. Route modifications, timing changes, and security enhancements demonstrated tactical learning and organizational flexibility. Yet casualty figures indicated that adaptation alone provided insufficient protection against innovative insertion techniques that exploited enemy assumptions about patrol doctrine. The cowboy insertion method had achieved tactical success through systematic disruption of enemy decision-making processes, rather than superior firepower or numerical advantage. The innovation forced reactive thinking that surrendered initiative regardless of specific countermeasures. When smaller forces mastered the mechanism of surprise and coordination, larger forces found themselves consistently disadvantaged despite numerical superiority and terrain familiarity. The drawdown of Allied forces under Vietnamization proceeded according to political timetables that ignored tactical success on the ground. In late 1971, the Australian government announced the withdrawal of the 1st Australian Task Force from South Vietnam, ending 6 years of operations in Phuoc Tuy Province. The SASR patrols that had achieved unprecedented effectiveness through cowboy insertion methods would extract regardless of their tactical dominance over enemy forces in the operational area. Evans led his final major insertion on March 8, 1972, knowing that political decisions had rendered tactical innovation irrelevant to strategic outcomes. His patrol landed at the familiar altitude of 1,300 feet, with Campbell's team following at the modified 10-minute interval that had proven so effective against VC adaptation. The insertion proceeded flawlessly, but the context had fundamentally changed. Instead of extending successful operations, the mission served as a tactical farewell to methods that had revolutionized small unit effectiveness. The last patrol covered familiar terrain along the Courtenay rubber plantation sector, where SASR teams had first tested dual insertion techniques 9 months earlier. Evans's men moved through jungle corridors that bore evidence of their sustained pressure. Abandoned trail networks, unused equipment caches, modified enemy movement patterns that testified to tactical dominance achieved through systematic innovation. The victory remained local and tactical rather than strategic, confined to operational sectors that would soon be abandoned regardless of their tactical significance. Campbell's blocking patrol maintained standard procedures during the final insertion, positioning his New Zealand team to cover exfiltration routes and provide tactical support. The professionalism remained consistent despite the approaching withdrawal, but the operational context carried emotional weight that statistics could not capture. The tactical method that had proved decisively superior would conclude not through enemy success, but through political decision-making that operated independently of battlefield effectiveness. The enemy response to the final patrol demonstrated continued tactical confusion caused by cowboy insertion methods. VC observation posts reported dual helicopter signatures and attempted to coordinate defensive responses based on established timing calculations. Enemy units displaced from suspected contact zones according to procedures developed over months of adaptation. The tactical impact persisted even as strategic circumstances eliminated its long-term significance. At 21:45 hours, Evans's patrol established final contact with a VC squad attempting to reoccupy trail networks that had been abandoned since December. The engagement lasted 12 minutes, resulting in 5 enemy casualties with no Australian losses. The tactical success replicated patterns established throughout the cowboy insertion period, but the context transformed its meaning. Instead of demonstrating continued operational effectiveness, the contact served as confirmation that tactical innovation had achieved its objectives despite strategic constraints. The captured documents from the final engagement revealed the extent of enemy tactical confusion caused by Australian insertion methods. VC planning documents showed systematic attempts to counter dual patrol operations through modified timing, altered routes, and enhanced security procedures. Despite these adaptations, enemy forces continued to suffer casualties that indicated fundamental tactical disadvantage. The papers documented organizational learning that proved insufficient against sustained innovation pressure. Evans returned to base processing the contradiction between tactical success and strategic withdrawal. His diary entry captured the emotional complexity. "We changed the way the jungle worked for 9 months. Every insertion forced them to guess. Every patrol kept them reactive. The numbers prove we won every engagement that mattered, but we're flying out tomorrow, and the war continues without us." The withdrawal proceeded according to predetermined schedules that ignored battlefield conditions. Helicopter assets that had perfected cowboy insertion techniques were reassigned to evacuation duties. Personnel who had developed tactical expertise through combat experience prepared for rotation to Australia. Equipment that had proven effective in dual patrol operations was transferred to remaining Allied units, who lacked institutional knowledge of insertion innovations. Major Thompson supervised the administrative conclusion of operations that had redefined Special Forces' effectiveness. His final reports documented tactical achievements that would influence military doctrine for decades, but the immediate strategic impact remained minimal. The innovation that had achieved tactical dominance would end through political decision rather than enemy success or operational failure. The broader war context provided perspective on tactical achievement within strategic constraints. North Vietnamese forces continued operations throughout South Vietnam, regardless of local tactical defeats in Phuoc Tuy province. The Ho Chi Minh Trail remained operational despite interdiction efforts. Enemy recruitment and training continued in base areas beyond the reach of small unit operations. Tactical innovation had achieved decisive local success within strategic circumstances that limited its overall impact. Campbell's final extraction followed standard procedures that had become routine through repetition. His New Zealand team boarded the UH-1H helicopter that had served as the second element in dozens of cowboy insertions. The tactical coordination that had proven so effective against enemy adaptation would conclude with professional efficiency rather than dramatic gestures. The innovation would survive in doctrine and training rather than continued combat application. The statistical legacy of cowboy insertion methods provided objective measurement of tactical effectiveness. Over 1,200 patrols had achieved casualty ratios that exceeded conventional military expectations by orders of magnitude. Enemy adaptation had proved insufficient against systematic innovation that disrupted decision-making processes rather than simply varying tactical procedures. The intellectual victory had been decisive within its operational context. Years later, the insertion method would influence Special Forces training worldwide, shaping how military professionals approach surprise, deception, and tactical flexibility. The VC adaptation that triggered cowboy insertion development demonstrated how enemy learning could be countered through systematic innovation rather than incremental modification. The lesson extended beyond Vietnam to fundamental principles of tactical thinking under pressure. Evans placed his equipment on the final extraction helicopter, carrying maps that documented 9 months of tactical dominance achieved through intellectual rather than material superiority. The quiet moment of departure carried no ceremony, only professional completion of duties that had redefined battlefield effectiveness. The war would continue, but the tactical innovation would endure in doctrine that recognized how small decisions could generate strategic effects. The helicopter lifted off from landing zones where cowboy insertions had first disrupted enemy tactical assumptions, carrying personnel whose innovation had changed warfare's intellectual dimension while political decisions determined strategic outcomes.